is Casey Gaarenstroom. I am a film programmer at the Museum of Pop Culture, also in Seattle, Washington, and I am the festival coordinator for the Science Fiction and Fantasy Short Film Festival. Yeah, so we only have about an hour with our panelists and with you all. So if you have any questions for any of the panelists, please put them in the chat and we can get through them. Otherwise, I invite all of our panelists to come on video and we can do a quick little intro for everyone before we dive into it. Yay! Hello all. Awesome. Hello, hello. Are we missing someone? Let's make sure that everyone's on here. All right, I think MarBelle still has to come up on video. There you are. Hello. Cool. So I would love for everyone to get a chance to introduce themselves, what you do, and why you're excited to be here at the NFFTY Film Summit talking about short films. And I'll just call on folks on my little Brady Bunch squares. So let's first go with Claudette.
Hey y'all, I'm Claudette Godfrey. I am the senior film programmer at South by Southwest. I'm responsible for programming feature films, overseeing the short film curation team, and managing kind of like all the organizational details for the film festival. I'm a white woman with blonde hair wearing a black tank top, and I'm in Austin, Texas, where South by Southwest takes place on Taco land.
Awesome. Thank you.
Oh, and I love short films because they're just my first love. You know, now I started with short films, grew, you know, over time. Now I do features and oversee kind of our full program, including episodics. And there's nothing quite as good as a really beautifully executed short film. It's just, you know, perfect. So I can never give them up.
Love it. A chef kiss for short films. And let's go with Carol.
Hi everyone, my name is Carol Nguyen. I am a Vietnamese Canadian woman. I'm wearing a dark flannel shirt with a green turtleneck and some circle glasses. I am a filmmaker. I make short documentaries, fictions, and recently dove into animation. My last film was called No Crying at the Dinner Table. And I just finished production for another short film. So I'm super excited to create films again, and especially doing that out of film school. I'm really excited to be here because NFFTY was one of the places where it started out for me. So excited to talk to you all.
Awesome. Thank you, Carol. Ji?
Hello, my name is Jihee. I am a Korean female. I'm wearing glasses with striped shirts with short black hair. I am an independent animator / motion designer. And I am just, I'm all about short films. I just make short films. And what I love about it is that you can provide so many stories and details in just like a short amount of time. And I think that's the beauty about it. And I'm just really happy to be here today joining NFFTY because, you know, there's not many chances right now to be like within this like one place with so many talented like filmmakers and animators, and yeah, so I'm just excited to be here.
Thank you. Ina, up next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ina Pira. I'm a senior curator at Vimeo. I am a white woman with long brown hair, and I'm wearing a black turtleneck and round glasses. At Vimeo, I'm primarily responsible for the Staff Picks channel, which is their sort of flagship channel that's been around for nearly 15 years. And we sort of live and breathe short films. So this is really exciting for me to be here. We work with filmmakers at all stages of their careers, but I'm most excited to work with new and emerging filmmakers and storytellers. So it's very exciting to be here and to meet all of you.
Alex?
Hi, my name is Alex Bose. I'm a white male in a big floppy purple sweater, and I'm a filmmaker in LA, which I believe I'm on Tonga land, and I work in documentary. So
Awesome. Thank you. And then MarBelle.
Hi, I'm MarBelle from Director's Notes. I'm a black male, increasingly graying from originally black hair. I'm wearing a red shirt and I'm in the UK. And yeah, I'm one of the co-founders of Director's Notes and the editor-in-chief. And yeah, we've been all about short films for like 15 years now. And I'm really excited to be here because it seems that we have a lot of shared DNA with NFFTY, with a lot of NFFTY alums appearing on Director's Notes and vice versa. So yeah, excited to be here today.
Awesome. Thank you all. And for my visual description, again, my name is Casey. I am a Filipino female, pink and purple sweater, glasses, Star Wars background. Awesome. Let's get into a little bit of a Q&A with you all. Again, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We would love to hear from the audience as well. So first, this is for anybody who would like to answer. What drew you to short films in your career, and how did you end up making or working with shorts, kind of as opposed to features?
I can answer.
oh,
Go ahead, Alex. You go.
honestly, at first I was in college and it was like the feasible thing, like financially and also just like resource wise. And also when I first was starting, I feel like I was really wordy, and shorts, as I was like starting to get into the process of even writing a short, I realized you had to really be good at editing. So I was like, oh, this is going to be really good for me because I want to say something, but I want to say it in not a paragraph, like maybe like 2 sentences. And so that was kind of my launch into it. Not sure.
Yeah, I would second everything that Alex said. I think also when you're young, it gives you the ability to innovate and try different things in a short amount of time and with less stakes as well. I think short films give you the ability to work with different people and, you know, get to see who you like to work with to begin with, how you like to work, and then take what you learn to a bigger scale eventually.
I can maybe chime in. My background was originally in festival programming, where I focused on feature-length films in my years programming film festivals, and sort of always was sort of jealous of the shorts programmers and all of the work they did with the short filmmakers and the shorts programs that they were able to curate every year. So transitioning over to Vimeo, it's been really exciting personally to be immersed in the short film format. I think, as both Alex and Carol mentioned, there's just like this freedom to experiment, and with that, on the receiving end of that, the types of stories and sort of the visual worlds that you're able to sort of in a short span of time really be immersed in has been really exciting. I think the short film format increasingly over the last few years has just sort of surpassed a lot of expectations, and we're seeing short filmmakers just do really incredible things in a short amount of time, and I think really elevating the form in new ways. So it's been really exciting to spend the last sort of 4 or 5 years really working with the short film filmmakers.
I first discovered shorts like in the dead of night because Channel 4 in the UK used to have this program called The Shooting Gallery. And they played a short film by Portishead, who I was a big fan of, called To Kill a Dead Man, and that got me into it. And then I realized the weird and wonderful world of shorts. And then through doing the site, I got to talk, it gave me a brilliant excuse to talk to filmmakers about how they were creating these things, quite often with, you know, lower budgets than you know, people who had a lot more experience but weren't half as creative. So that's always been a draw to me through all the years of doing Director's Notes.
Awesome, thank you. Any other comments on that one?
I would just say, you know, because now program across all categories, but I started actually with our Texas high school shorts when I was an intern at South by way back in the day. And I never have really been able to give them up because of it's like the joy and the passion that short filmmakers have. There's just something about like the energy that they bring to a room and to a festival, and like that a shorts program can kind of like capture, that has all that's what's always kept me hooked.
Awesome. Thank you all. And so for my next question, I do want to hear from everybody about this one, but what do you think makes short films as its own art form so special? Like everyone's kind of talking about how it breeds innovation and creativity in a different sense. So I was hoping to hear from folks on how short films, why short films are just that special little thing. And then let's start with Alex this time.
What I love most about short films is that you can usually fixate on like a pretty small thing. Like for me, I've enjoyed doing shorts about a small emotion or this feeling, this human feeling that like you might think is specific to you, and then you make this thing and you realize, oh my gosh, this like connects to other people. Even if you're using like visuals or specific things that are like about your life, if it's like I think I need to be specific with Finding Franklin, which is the one that's programmed here. You know, I wanted to do a film that brought my great grandmother into like my queer life, and that's why I made like the main character, her name and stuff. It just like little specifics that really were only for me, but it was able to then hopefully be kind of a universal thing, but also feel really special to me, but connect to other people.
That's so sweet. Thank you. Jihi, do you have anything you're thinking about?
I guess like I would say maybe for an experimental short film for me, well, I guess it's same for any short films, but for me, because I studied experimental animation and also a lot of my friends do experimental short films, I just really enjoyed the fact that you don't really follow the traditional steps or like the traditional process of like let's say like a storyboard or dialogues. It doesn't have to be a linear like narrative story. I really like that. And also you just enjoy the like the randomness of every kind of like you just you know, bet on it and then be like, oh, the chances are blah blah blah. And then I just really loved that kind of process in general. And you know, I just really liked for any short films, I just really like seeing the audiences like give different interpretations about the story. Also, I think one of the other thing that intrigued me about short films in general was that my first encounter with short films were like in gallery spaces and other spaces. So I find that these type of films have more like chances in a lot of like different places. And yeah, so when I first saw it in galleries, I was like, oh, they could be used, these kind of short films can be used as like short like gifts or like, you know, I don't know, like any type of form or yeah, I'm like going all over the place, but yeah, that's why. Yeah,
Totally. MarBelle, what about you?
I'd say that for me, one of the things is because it's such an accessible form of film, well, the most accessible form of filmmaking, because, you know, very few new filmmakers rush out and make a feature, although some do, and I'm very jealous of them. But it means that lots of ideas get to bloom and filmmakers get to try things that they wouldn't necessarily do or have the opportunity to do later in their careers because there's more on the line. So that experimentation for me, you can see, I really enjoy when I've followed a filmmaker across their shorts, and you can see them kind of finding their voice almost in real time. And the format and the compactness of the form allows them to do that kind of, you know, freely, mostly the most freely that they ever get to do across their careers, which for me is, you know, endlessly exciting. You know, I love to see that, and, you know, always keeps me interested. Well, it has done for, you know, a decade and a half of doing this. So yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Ina, what about you?
You know, working at sort of at a tech company and an online video company, I think I really just over the years come to appreciate, you know, we spend so much time on our phone and on our computers, and to be in a position where we can introduce people to art and creativity and really incredible storytelling through the short film format in a way that they may not see otherwise feels like a really exciting place to be. And for all of the reasons I previously mentioned, our short films and the filmmakers who are sort of experimenting and sort of honing in on their craft or finding their voice or exploring different stories, we get to connect those filmmakers and those films with audiences, and that really excites me. That, you know, screening at film festivals is incredibly important and so valuable for the films and the filmmakers, but then to take it a step beyond that and be sort of this online connector between the festivals and people who will then, you know, watch the films and be moved by them as we are, that's really exciting for me.
Well, thank you. Carol, what about you?
I think not all stories in our life are right for a feature film, and oftentimes I think short films give us the option of talking just about a moment or a feeling or something that might not have a traditional story arc or structure, and that's what I love about the short film the most, the innovation and the ability to experiment, as we've talked about. I also think the distribution of a short film is very interesting. That makes it very accessible in comparison to a feature film that, you know, both a short and a feature can go through the festival run, but at the end of the day, maybe an indie feature might not be accessible to audiences after that, or you'll have to pay for a feature online, whereas nowadays you can find what I consider cinema and short films free on platforms like Vimeo, for instance, and that makes it very digestible to audiences, and also being able to see world cinema for free at your fingertips.
Oh yeah. And Claudette.
All of y'all had such great answers. I think for me, like, I think of it from my perspective because I'm not a filmmaker, right? So I'm mostly watching tons. I'm gorging on all of these beautiful short films. And for me, I think what stands out about the best ones is their efficiency and their, you know, like you were saying, Carol, of that not every film has to be a feature, right? It's like when every feature film is suddenly 2 hours long. Like, I love that a short film can come in, give you an experience, reach you emotionally, and have an impact and like stick in your mind, and it's 2 minutes long or 5 minutes or fill in the blank, right? Some of them are 40 minutes long. Most of them are not 40 minutes long, but I love the ability to like play with all this creativity, which includes how to really efficiently, you know, make an impact. And that's, you know, kind of what is the most exciting to me. You know, I'm going through so many emotions every day watching, you know, 50 films in a day, and the ones that really are able to execute that impact and engage me emotionally are the ones that really stand out.
Well, thank you for a perfect segue into my next question, Claudette. When you are watching a short, and for the filmmakers, when you're watching other people's shorts, what are you looking for? What grabs your attention in a really, really well-made short? What kind of makes you give the chef kiss to a really well-made short? What's the special sauce in a good short? And then I do also want to hear from everyone. So let's start with Ina on this one.
Sure. This question comes up on every panel, and it's always the hardest one to answer because I think it's, you know, there's so many factors, and it really is so specific to the film and the story that that filmmaker is trying to tell. And each story sort of merits a different approach and a specific approach that makes it that successful and connects with me or, you know, a potential audience member. I think we have a really broad mandate at Vimeo in terms of the types of films that we want to feature and curate. In sort of an ideal world, that is that sort of this happy marriage of really incredible original storytelling with really ambitious craft. And when these two sort of come together, that in some ways is, the ideal staff pick. But I think even that is so limiting, because we often will feature films that are just really ambitious in terms of craft and are pushing that medium forward and are experimenting in a way, then the story is sort of secondary. And that's really exciting to see, because we always want filmmakers to, push in different directions and test out new ideas. And then we're always, personally so drawn to story first. So for example, one of my favorite shorts is, I think this is the closest to how the footage looked. An animated documentary made with just very simple household objects, which on the surface, the craft is very, basic and accessible to anybody, but the story is just so powerful and human, and sort of shines through the very sort of handmade look of the film, which I think actually lets the story shine even more. So it really just depends on the story. Is the the worst best answer I can give.
Totally. What about Carol?
Well, I think my answer is pretty vague and subjective, but I personally think the best short films are the ones that you leave the theater and you still think about. Films that make you feel, but also films that aren't just, cool for being cool and, that was beautiful and stylistic in the moment, but it doesn't really impact you. So for me, those are the films that really stick with me and that stand out.
Awesome, thank you. What about Claudette?
I think for me, I used to always say, like, I want to see a story I have never seen before, which sounds like, does that exist? But all of us know that it does. Or a story that you've seen like a million times, but that you haven't, that's like being told from a unique director's vision or in a new way. With shorts, there are, from my side, where we're getting thousands and thousands of submissions every year, there are, the well-worn territory of so many of them. So then when you see something that's like, maybe it is a similar theme, but it's just told from like a much more specific, we're kind of like about discovering a director who has like a very specific point of view or a unique point of view, or just that they have their own point of view, instead of kind of a lot of things that I'm seeing are a little bit of recycled content, things that we're all watching on TV or have seen in all of these other places. It's like, I saw that, now I'm going to go make that, but instead of making your own version of that, which is kind of more along the lines of what I think that we're looking for. So it's definitely story 100%, 1000%. Definitely with submissions, people think there's like some special trick they can get, like get a B-list celebrity in there. Like, what if it's only 2 minutes long? What if? It doesn't matter. It's all about the film. So like all those what ifs, all that energy should be going right into your film, right into your story. And I said before, but I really believe like the efficiency aspect of it, just because the Oscars qualification is at 40 minutes, you don't have to make a film that is 40 minutes, I think there really is an art in finding the right length for the story that you're telling. And things that are super short can have an impact. The other thing I always think works really well, and it just reminded me because Daniel Kwan was in that intro that you played to the session, like with the Daniels, with their music videos and with, the films they've gone on to make, they're starting with like a very simple, but very unique idea. And they're just taking that one simple, unique idea and then executing it like off the fucking charts, So it's like that, I think is, there's a danger of also like trying to put too much into your short film. So I think focusing, like Carol said, on the like, you can actually just focus on a moment and like really explore that, or one simple idea, and then just like kill it with your execution.
Well, thank you. MarBelle, what about you?
I totally wish I'd gone earlier with this question because I agree with what everybody's saying. And I suppose kind of when we program shorts, the director's notes, it's that kind of feeling of when I'm going through the submissions of that shareable feeling, that the feeling that I instantly, even sometimes even before the credits have rolled, I want to reach out to the rest of the team and go, oh, you have to see this. This is brilliant. And actually, I might take this one instead of giving it to any of you because that's how much I love it. And so it's that feeling. And I think that, you know, to go back to what Claudette said, I think that that quite often does come from that personal perspective, that telling the story the way that only you could have told it. Like, and again, it doesn't matter if it's a story, because, you know, there's that, you know, what is it? There's the 7 stories, you know, the archetypes that, you know, that are all stories are built of. But if you tell it from a personal perspective and with, you know, I suppose that passion and knowledge that comes from that, it's going to come out in a way that only you could have done that nobody else with the same budget, with the same equipment is going to be able to create the film the same way that you did. And I think that that comes across in spades when you see films like that. So like I'm reminded of a film which I know is a NFFTY film as well, To the Girl That Looks Like Me. And that's this brilliant story talking about, you know, being black and hair, and it triggers in on looking at hair and the way that it's been co-opted. But again, it's told from this very specific, very personal approach, as opposed to just being, you know, a general polemic complaining about it. And that instantly brings you in. And, you know, the opening scene is amazing. It's this, you know, the direct beat having her hair plaited and all these Caucasian girls taking notes on the braids. And that came from a dream of hers. So as personal as it could possibly have been, and was one of the, you know, most standout scenes in that film. So yeah, I think, you know, I'm reiterating what other people are saying, but yeah, it's that personal thing.
Yeah, it's awesome. Thank you. And Jihi, what about you?
I agree with what everyone said. I also, something that I think I feel like a good short film is something that also just stays on my mind for a while. It pops up time to time, and also something that inspires me to make another short film. Like for example, like just like if a short film has an aesthetic or style or technique that I want to be using in my next short film, then it just inspires me a lot. Also, I guess, I don't know, something that grabs my attention sometimes is when they have really short synopsis. Like, I'm just curious what, you know, the film is going to be about, or yeah, it's a 50-50 chance that the film will turn out real good or real bad, but it just really grabs my attention. Yeah.
Totally. And then Alex, what about you?
Oh, wow. Great answers, everybody. I would have maybe said like 3 of these things. So I would say I kind of agree with MarBelle about when I'm watching something and I'm already excited to share with people. I am constantly sharing shorts. I just shared it. I don't know when it came out. I think it's newer, but I saw it on Vimeo staff picks, but Baba by Sarah Block and Lisa Kono was so interesting. I'm using that as an example because they blur documentary with like fashion. And it was just like, I remember halfway through that going, this feels like an Agnes Varda film, which is like, she's one of my favorite filmmakers. And it also just felt so fresh and like kind of devoid of time, like because they shot it on film. And I just like that they blurred all these different mediums. And for me, when I see someone who's pulling from all these different places and doing it effectively, like getting into my heart, and I'm also just like visually just like really stimulated, I get so excited because I don't see a lot of that in features as much as I do in shorts. I think shorts, there's just so much experimentation that happens that's like so inspiring. And it's like I actually forget who, someone said that, you know, it inspires them to create another short. It's like I love that when you get out of a good short, you're just like, oh, I'm gonna like crack open this idea again, but rethink about it because I saw this perspective that this person did, and it was really interesting.
Awesome. Cool. For the filmmakers here, what is your philosophy and approach when you're getting ready to create a short film? What sort of things do you keep in mind before you even get on a set and like the pre-production phase?
I think for me, I start out with every film thinking, how the hell do I make a film again?
Totally.
Because each film is so unique, but I think for a director, you go through so many, like the phase of making a film, being with it from the beginning to end, and then redoing that is very long, as opposed to cinematographers who can jump projects, and then having to dive into that writing phase, having to re-dive into who's the right people to work with. It's just like a new experience every time. But I would say something that I thread throughout all my experiences is knowing why I'm making the film to begin with. And in that Bible, the purpose of my film, why it's important to me, but also why it's important universally. Because we were talking about personal storytelling, and you can tell a very specific story to your culture, for example, but I think that cinema is a public and universal experience, and one thing that makes a good story amazing is also if everyone else can relate to it. And then of course, kind of trickling that thought of why towards every scene and character, and just being able to build like a solid Bible for my film, in the writing and so on and so forth.
Oh yeah, thank you. That's awesome. Alex or Jihi, any comments on that one?
I mean, that was a great answer. For me, it's like, it depends on what part of the process. So if it's like, if in the beginning, I get most excited about who do I want to work with, like, especially if I've not worked with a person before and I like really am excited by them and we've been like talking, because that happens a lot online. It's actually happened a ton through Vimeo with me. And that's really exciting because then they always bring amazing ideas. And then you can also see how to bring their life into it and their perspective. So I just love the collaborative like energy, that aspect of the short process. And then also like when you're gonna shoot the thing, it's so fun to have your idea of it. And I always like work in like, I have these like bullet points of like, these are things we have to get done in the day, but then also next to those, it's like, it's what are those saying? Like if we need to get this scene about blah, 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 like what is the purpose of that? Because when you're on set, then you can also like improv. And I'm right now in the documentary world, and I just like love like letting things just play out. And I feel like that's really interesting when shorts that aren't even docs are like kind of playing with that aesthetic and just like letting it feel a little bit more like its own thing instead of super written. So I don't know, it's just like it's really exciting.
Totally. Awesome. And then for the programmers in the house, kind of similarly, when you're curating a block of short films or a festival or a staff picks list, what is your philosophy? How do you keep audiences in mind when you're programming a bunch of shorts?
I'll go. Because there's so many films that are a downer. I just mean like when you're looking at like how many films that are getting made and produced, like, there's the most narrative shorts, and there's also a lot of people making their first film. It's cathartic. They're like working through their history, their trauma, all of those things. So for me, a lot of those films are also very, very compelling, but always making sure that there is sort of a little bit of like a ride, maybe not a total roller coaster. Sometimes we'll do it at the end to make it give you a little laugh or something, that works. But it's sort of just like programming it as an overall experience. There's a lot of ways to do it. I feel like everyone has their own little philosophy of, if you start with something shorter, you put the long stuff at the front, or what you don't put, definitely do not, I would say, do not put the longest film at the end, because it always feels the longest because you're already like, how long have I've been in here. With any film, I feel like that's just part of what the whole culture of everything is now. So, you know, and we always try to keep it under 90 minutes so that none of the films kind of at the end get that feeling of restlessness of the audience. But, you know, overall, we're looking for, you know, just diversity of the story. Some festivals program around themes. We do not do that. And because a lot of festivals do that, people think like someone today said South by doesn't even play any like documentaries, right? Like they're only about culture and pop culture, and they would never want like an environmental documentary. And I'm like, here's all the environmental documentaries we've played. You know, there is a diversity of programming at most festivals. So for us, we are, you know, trying to have a diversity of stories, styles, types of directors, locations, the locations of the filmmakers and where the films are taking place, or, you know, different vibes, and kind of trying to create a experience where they all are elevated by each other, where they're working together to like build something even more than what they do on their own, I guess.
Oh yeah, that's great. Ina or MarBelle, anything?
Sure.
You can go. Oh, no, you go, Ina.
So yeah, we like to think of Staff Picks as kind of a year-round film festival. We staff pick films almost 365 days a year. Sometimes on a weekend we skip a day, but we try not to think of it in sort of like 90-minute blocks, which is really freeing because we don't have the time constraints that you would at a film festival, and also the way people watch films online, those habits are a little bit different. So we're not thinking of the film sort of thematically from one to the other, but we are trying to make sure that there is a diversity of storytelling, of different types of films. So we have comedies, animation, experimental, music videos, narrative films. And the only thing that we try to keep in mind is as we staff pick is that we are sort of keeping some variety in there, so that if you're coming to the staff pick channel on a Monday afternoon and you have 30 minutes before your next meeting or before you go on to set and you want to be inspired, if you're a documentary filmmaker, you can find documentaries, but you might also watch a music video. And the hope is that regardless of what you watch, that you'll find something in there that you'll be inspired by, even if it's not that thing specifically that you focus on or that you work on. And so many of the folks that watch staff picks are also filmmakers themselves and artists themselves. So for me, in terms of like thinking who the audience is, I'm always sort of excited to hear when filmmakers are watching staff picks and inspired by them and sort of like building that community and finding each other. So Alex, to hear you say that is like really exciting, because that's that's the hope. And we know that so many, you know, especially emerging filmmakers turn to staff picks for inspiration and for story ideas and for techniques. And so we always sort of try to make sure that that variety is there for anyone who might be looking for inspiration on Vimeo.
Yeah, I'd say similar to what Ina was just saying, because we're online based, we have got this wide gamut of films that we feature, you know, from dance films, you know, experimental, music videos as well, which I suppose would tend to be in their own kind of category, separate off. And so, but because I think, yeah, because our name is Director's Notes, and the idea was always to get an insight into these films, there, you know, it happens very rarely, but sometimes there might be a film that we absolutely love, but we won't program it because we don't think that necessarily we can add to the conversation. Maybe that will be that we've read an interview that has already covered all the bases and we think that there's not much we can add to it, or that the techniques necessarily why the film was enjoyable, the techniques in it, we're not that interested in digging into them. But because what we want to do with our films is, the idea is that you'll watch a film on Director's Notes and you'll absolutely love it. And the first question will be, well, how did they do that? You know, how did they get that location? How did they get that performance? How did the idea develop? And so it's always, because all the films that we program on the site daily, they all come with an interview with the filmmakers. So we always want to have something that we can dig dig down into it, and that you can come away from after watching the film, you can come away with a better understanding, especially as a filmmaker, as to the steps that that person took to get that film, that idea, I suppose, up onto screen, really. So that's really important to us. And then we do occasionally, we program for festivals, and they tend to come to us and ask us for themed things, which is kind of good as well. It shows, I suppose, the diversity of the program, of the films that we've programmed through the years, because we tend to do that. We tend to choose from our alumni for that. So, yeah, for instance, we did one at a festival recently, and they asked for a coming of age screening that would work from 12 through to 18-year-olds, and we were able to find that. Or we did one that was a Black Lives Matter one last year, or a comedy specific one. So we still do those for festivals, but when it comes to ours, we don't stick to a particular theme, and we don't necessarily worry about how the films stack up against each other, because the way that we see it is, if a film's on director's notes, it's got our seal of approval. We're saying it's worth your time, and not only is it worth your time to watch this film, it's worth your time to then spend the extra few minutes to read how the filmmaker put this film together. So that's kind of the way that we approach it.
Awesome, thank you. So in your experience working with short films in all of your different areas, what have been some consistent do's and don'ts that you've run into, or patterns and stuff like that? Anyone can jump on this one.
I just want to say, don't rely on posts to fix things. I think that's a really important thing. And also, with that said, because I have supported myself for the last 8 years in LA as an editor, give yourself options. I feel like there's so many projects where people are so dead set on this version that they had at one point, but when they get through the process of shooting and everything, they realize, oh, it might not have been the best with what was actually done or feasible. And I always recommend people, if they have time in the day, or build it in, give yourself an option to either do the scene without words, or do something that you can play with in the edit, so that you can have a little bit of leeway later on, because you don't want to be just stuck on this one version that you had.
One thing I would say is just, I think it's really wise, I don't know if I would say it's necessary, but I always feel like filmmakers sort of come to us and they're like, how do I go to film festivals, and how do I get my film online and sell it to a sales agent, and have a lot of questions about the distribution of their film. And they're questions that I think for the most part should sort of be asked, or sort of you should have answers in mind as you're making the film, what your goals are for the film. Because I think so often a filmmaker will be really immersed in the film making experience, in an ideal world, that's the way that it should be. But the reality is that film festivals have a whole calendar of deadlines and submissions, and the way that films go from festivals to distributors to sales agents to online platforms, all of these things sort of work in an ecosystem, and it's all constantly developing. The pandemic sort of threw out a lot of the way that these things used to work, and now they're sort of being redefined. And as you sort of navigate this process with your film, I think you will be doing yourself a favor if you sort of start thinking about this as you're making the film and earlier on, so that, I want to make this film so that I can, have thousands of people see it and hopefully impact some change on this issue. Or I want to take it to film festivals and programmers and other filmmakers and find collaborators. All of these different strategies are valuable, but I think it will also sort of determine, how you put your film out there, where you try to premiere it. So that would just be something that I would recommend sort of keeping in mind as you're going through the process of making your film.
Yeah, it's great advice.
To piggyback on that, a lot of what I'm always telling filmmakers is it's sort of like what you were saying about editing, Alex, of that, being open to whatever the experience that you end up having, whatever it is, filmmaking, a lot of it is hearing a lot of no's. Like, no, you're gonna get in this festival. No, you're not gonna get this grant. So part of it is like having that will to like believe in yourself and like keep going forward. And then, you know, realizing there's a lot of different lives that a film can have. You know, some films just go online, some films premiere at South by or Sundance, some films premiere at more regional festivals or festivals that are like really interested in a specific type of film or filmmaker, like, and all of those things are great, like Ina said, but I think there's a little bit of, you know, there's only one person who's going to win the Oscar this year, right? So if that's your goal, like, don't like, you know, miss all the experiences that you're having along the way, because like all you want to do is like get into Sundance, you know, that's like a subset of people. Like every festival, it's like that. Everything is like that. So kind of making sure that you're enjoying the experiences that you have, that you take advantage of all the different festivals that you do get into, and the, you know, people that, you know, even just like being able to connect with an audience in person or have a conversation with a stranger about how they felt about your film, like being able to really absorb all those experiences and not let your why didn't I get that Oscar or whatever it is, you know, like kind of thing, you know, get you down, you know. And also number one advice, be kind, because it's all, film is a small community and you're always going to see people again. And also, you know, that's good life advice, but just, you know, remembering that there's a lot of things happening with a lot of people, and just like give out good vibes no matter what's happening.
I have a nice boring one, which isn't as much fun as making the film itself, but is having all your materials ready to help push the film, because there's never going to be anyone who's going to champion your film as much as you. And so, you know, quite often filmmakers that we're really keen to cover, they don't have any stills, they don't have any behind the scenes stuff, they don't have, you know, a press kit, and we work with them to do that, but not everyone's as patient as us. So, so the easier you can make it for somebody to be able to cover your film, if you've got a great press pack that's got loads of stills in there and, you know, links to your websites and your cast and crew and, you know, all their handles and such, and you can make it easy that, you know, you can send that off to all, you know, all the other sites, you know, who do similar work to us, or festivals, and you can make their lives so much easier that they can watch your film, go, this is amazing, and they can, you know, even without having to contact you again, write a glowing, beautiful article that's really well illustrated with all these great stills and these great behind the scenes images that show what a great filmmaker you are. Then you're doing yourself a massive favor. And I think a lot of filmmakers, I completely understand it. You know, filmmakers are excited about making films and not excited about, you know, the marketing and promoting of their films. But you know, if you don't do that, nobody's going to see your amazing film. It's, you know, just having a great film isn't good enough by itself, unfortunately. So, you know, doing that is going to, and also, you know, getting all your cast and crew and friends and family on board, because they're also invested. And so that, you know, when you do have a screening or you're releasing it online, they can all jump on it at once, which will help kind of raise the noise level and, you know, help you get noticed by other, you know, other sites, other people. So yeah, I'd say it's very boring, but yeah.
But practical, very practical.
That's the best advice I heard all day.
Can I jump on with a last comment for this question?
Absolutely, Carol.
I think as someone who just graduated from university and someone who just did a pandemic festival run, it's kind of a two-parter, but do not share your film online. I think as a short film, some people don't really understand how much value you have in, you know, first of all, owning your rights, but also sharing it. Part one of my kind of comment is that a lot of young filmmakers are very subconscious of what they make, and they're aware of all the things that went wrong and these details that are not perfect, and that kind of prevents them from sharing it with the world. But then that prevents you from potentially meeting collaborators, that prevents you from just having your film seen. And as I said earlier, I feel like cinema, like the point of cinema is to have an audience, and without an audience, what is your work? And then having gone through the pandemic festival run, actually starting with South by Southwest. Yeah, wish I could have been there. Had to cancel my Airbnb, didn't get my money back. Starting, March of last year, we saw like a boom of kind of like online platforms and online festivals, and a lot, trying to compete with the streaming platforms that we have now, and a lot of short film platforms. Many that are very intriguing to young filmmakers, and maybe filmmakers that might not have distribution on board, that offers you, be on our platform and we share like a 50-50 revenue deal, but it's like 2-year exclusive or 5-year exclusive. And that's very intriguing to a lot of young people. But you have to know what you're missing out on and what the worth of your film is by being exclusive to this one place and this one specific audience for that amount of time. And again, all the opportunities you're missing, and maybe that being your only portfolio piece at that stage of your career, there's a lot that you could miss out on.
Awesome. Thank you. I hope folks at home are taking notes, because this is great advice. We do have a few questions in from the audience. And so I think these are some filmmaker-based questions. So I will ask Jihi, what is your personal creative short film process, and how does it start? What do you have to do? What is the beginning process like? What is that creative journey like for you?
I think it's really same for anyone, but my, I guess, first step is I talk with a lot of my friends. I just like talk, and then in those kind of like daily conversations, you just really get kind of like this several like terms or words that you just get stuck with it. And then from there, I just start kind of writing notes, or kind of search online of the deeper meaning of the term. And then I don't think this is a great advice, but I don't storyboard. I don't do storyboards. I just really dive into my the animating software and just start drawing. And then from there, I start drawing a bunch of stuff, and then after I finish animating, I just combine those things together at the end and then see how it goes. And then it's kind of like the process of keep editing and editing and editing, and then finally you get a film. And I think I don't think that's a good advice, but that's my working process.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Carol or Alex, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I will only add this because it actually ended up being kind of interesting. I always do voice memos. Like I'm a big walker, which is like also rare in LA. I'm always walking around with like music or whatever, and I'm just like observing. And sometimes I'll just like, it's just easy to just like be like, I'll just write this observation or a feeling or something. And I actually ended up making a short using one of my voice memos one time, and just used the audio and paired it with this other project that I never finished, and it ended up being its own short, which was kind of a fun process. So I would recommend if there is something that you like to do, whether it's like writing it down, or you don't be afraid to like use that thing down the road, especially if you're gonna do something experimental. It's kind of fun to play with mediums that way. But that, yeah, voice memo, or just like something that's like in the moment, because you can also return to it and be like, oh yeah, that was the spark that like excited me about this, when you've gone down the pit and you're like, I hate this project, it's going to be so bad, and you're like, oh wait, no, there actually was something early on. So
awesome. And there was also a question, could you recommend a few short films? So if anybody has any to recommend right now, I would say go ahead and do it in the chat. Just make sure you're chatting to everyone, so Emma, who asked that question, can get some info on these films. And then also to the filmmakers, another question from the chat. As filmmakers, are you also heavily involved in the story / script writing, or just directing?
For me personally, I'm very heavy into the script writing phase as well. I don't think I'm a natural script writer, but the stories that I want to tell, I feel like unfortunately there are not a lot of people of my background and who are scriptwriters. So I feel like that forces me to really hone into my personal stories and use my writing skills as well. But I do want to try directing something that I haven't written. I haven't done that yet, but I'm just curious to try.
Awesome. G or Alex? G.
I think for me is I'm involved in pretty much everything. I think when it as an animator, because with directing, you just hold a pen and then you just direct and then you make an animation and that's it. And I think, but then I think I'm more involved in the story writing. I think once you have a perfect story, then you can move on to step 2. So yeah.
Awesome.
Early on, like when I was doing my first shorts, I kind of did a lot of roles, but it was also kind of by necessity. And it was also nice to just learn all the different roles. But as I've worked more and more and more, I kind of bring more people along for the ride if we're able to make it happen, because it just gets a lot of times stronger, especially with so many amazing different perspectives. But I would say try to learn how to do that, like the writing process, if you can. Again, not to bring it back to editing, it just helps down the road, even all the way to editing. Like it really, there's so many different versions of your project, and if you have a hand in all of it, it's going to help you so much more the next one. And that's for me what's been the most helpful, is it always gets a little bit easier in some way. Even if it's a tiny way you learn something from some project, you won't do that the same way the next time, but it's beneficial to be aware of all the different moving parts.
Awesome. Thank you. We also have a question from Julia, who is 17 and applying to colleges. They were wondering whether everyone went to college, and if so, where they went and what they studied. And then I would also ask that you maybe include some advice for folks who are looking to go to school for filmmaking or wanting to get into film programming or something like that. So let's start with Jihi, actually.
Well, I did my bachelor's in RISD, Rhode Island School of Design, and then I studied, and then I did my master's at CalArts, California Institute of the Arts. In college, I studied this program called Film Animation Video, literally FAV as short. And in grad school, I studied experimental animation. I guess advice to apply to college. First, it sounds cheesy, but don't doubt your potential. Just apply to, I don't know, this, like any schools that you had in mind. Just apply, and then if they reject you, that's just because the style or something that just doesn't match with you. If a college accepts you, then I mean that's the college for you. And so I don't know, I feel like don't be discouraged when you get rejected. That's a really bad advice, but
I think that's great advice. We're talking about, yeah, it's a lot of no's in this industry. You gotta get through it.
But yeah, I mean, that's gonna be your, I guess, first no's or yeses, but I mean, yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Claudette, what about you?
Well, I'm born and raised in Austin, and I went to college in Austin. I went to UT Film School. I did not become a filmmaker, so I'm not sure that, but I did, I was like the vice president of like the film club or whatever, living that nerdy life. And that's a person from South by came, I guess that was in 2005, came and was like, hey, I'm looking for an intern. And then that's kind of how I like got in the door. And then I sort of tuned out of film school. I think for me, at that time too, it was a little, like I could not bear the pressure of the competition of like every dude in my class, like so many white guys, and all of them were like, I'm Quentin Tarantino's protege, just wait. And I'm like, that's what every white dude everywhere is thinking. And I was like, I don't know. I think too, this was like before, this was way before iPhones and that internet was the way it was, and you could find kind of your tribe and community. And I was definitely very intimidated by these dudes who like came into film school as a walking IMDb of everything, and I would always like say whenever they went around and said like your favorite films and everyone was like picking esoteric shit, I would say like E.T. and Top Gun, and because they were, and also because, I let that intimidate me. And I would say definitely, I'm sure film school is more diverse now than it was when I went. And just to find your tribe, all of this whole entire everything, like going to film festival, it's about finding community. Like getting film on Vimeo, it's about connecting with your audience, finding community. And I think at school, if you can find your community for that, for me, it was outside of school, but it was through school, where I was like, oh, I don't want to be a filmmaker. I did end up kind of following the producing track, but I was like, oh no, I don't want to produce one person's film. I want to like be the cheerleader for a lot of people's film. And I just had the opportunity to see what that was. And also I'm just organized and like to do events. So I went down that track instead. But also other advice, watch a lot of movies. But don't get discouraged, and definitely just like apply wherever you want. You just don't know, especially now in the COVID times. Like, don't listen to your guidance counselor. They don't know shit. Apply wherever you want. If that like $50 application fee is like what stands between you and like your biggest dreams, like pay that shit, because you'll never, like, this is your chance. Follow your dreams.
Follow your dreams. Awesome. Thank you. MarBelle, what about you?
Well, I made it up basically. So me and my co-founder Rob Monday, when we came out of university, we didn't go to one of the a great film school in the UK. We went to a university which I won't name because I don't want to slag it off, but we came out and we like that. For us, there was this massive gap between the films that we loved, that we'd go to the cinema to see, and the films that we thought that we could possibly make. And this is very early YouTube. I think Vimeo's maybe like 1 year old at this point. So there aren't really that many short films there. So we kind of created the thing that we wanted, because we kind of sat together and went, how can we make filmmakers tell us everything about their process? And it's like, if we interview them, and that was the genesis of the site. That's why it existed, was because we wanted to be able to grill filmmakers about how they made their work and how an idea got made. And so there wasn't anything at that point in time, and so we created it, really. So yeah,
love that. Yeah, also super viable option. Make it up, do it yourself, create your own path. I love it. Alex, go for it.
I wanted to go next only because MarBelle, actually, Director's Notes was the first place. My first short I put online in like 2011 was like, had like any sort of write-up about. It was my first interview I've ever done. It like made my whole life then. It literally like gave me so much excitement about like, oh my God, this person I don't know who like across the pond like wants to like hear about this. Like, this is insane. And I think it was Carol who was talking about don't be afraid to put online. Like, aside from film school, I went to film school in Chicago. It was amazing. Columbia, fabulous school, but like online is where I've had the most like community, I guess. It's a great, so yes, if you can go to film school, absolutely utilize that tool, figure out how it works for you. Like, I went for a few years, did all my gen eds at a community college in Indiana. You can get scrappy about it. But like, I think with the internet, it's just incredible that you can really, honestly, I don't want to say you can skip some of these steps, but in some ways you can, right? I see Claudette. It's like you can do your own thing.
Y'all, my niece wants to go to film school and I'm like, I don't know if you need it. I I don't know. It's hard for me to recommend against it. It's the same thing you're saying, but also now there's just so much information and so many tools to like, I don't know, there's no right or wrong answer, but I would say like, if it's available to you, you have someone supporting you, great. But if you don't, like, don't let that stop you. You can follow your dreams and just use the internet.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's just, there's so much you can get at any school, I guess, and whether it's film school or whatever. But yeah, I just think it's really about pushing your stuff out there and being okay for like being willing to have critique and stuff, because you have no idea what can happen. And with this film festival, director's notes, Vimeo, like I've had so much amazing supportive moments throughout the years, and it's just because I like uploaded stuff. So
awesome. Ina, go for it.
I was typing, but I think the question was about film school, right? Or, I was in an honors program where you sort of like design your own major in college, and I took a class in every major my school offered. So I didn't go to film school, but I ended up making my own film program, sort of like documentary, poli-sci, hybrid program. It was very much sort of focused in sort of a documentary as a form of activism and like using it for positive change. And then on a whim took an internship at the Tribeca Film Festival and like immediately caught the bug of programming. I just like being that connector between films and audiences, and like the thrill of being in the cinema when that happened was just like sparks flying for me. And filmmaking will always be a passion, but I think being like, as Claudette said, like being able to support so many films and helping them reach such a wide audience is just, it's kind of a drug. And it's really exciting when you see a film that you just like want everybody to see it, and then to be able to like click one button and then like 20,000 people see it overnight is incredible. And I feel really lucky to be in a position to be able to do that. So I guess I sort of took the film school route or ish, but then found my way to curating.
Awesome. And Carol, what about you?
I did go to film school. I went to Concordia University in Montreal. And I guess my advice, if you do go to film school, is don't neglect your electives. Because sometimes we forget that, yes, we're in a film program, we could take a bunch of film courses and just learn about cinema all the time, but we're storytellers and we need to keep on enriching ourselves with new ideas, new perspectives of the world, learn how to think critically in other ways. Some of my favorite courses that really inspired my films and just like the way that I take in stories and people's ideas were like poli-sci and like anthropology courses and psychology. Yeah, I mean, you're paying for these classes, so might as well take things that you're interested in. So yeah.
Yeah, take advantage of it. Awesome. Thank you all.